So I want to introduce our wonderful panel that we have today. We have Lily Ray, VP of SEO Strategy and Research at AMSIV, Kevin Indig, the growth advisor and creator of Growth Memo, Ross Hudgens, founder and CEO of Siege Media, and we have Steve Toth, founder of SEO Notebook. I feel like these people don't really need much introduction, but here we are. First thing that I'm going to ask the panel to kick things off is really the death of traditional SEO. Lots of people are running around saying, SEO is dying, it's dead, traffic and clicks are going to go to zero or near zero. What are your thoughts about how that's happening and unfolding? And do you think that is true? First up, I'll elect Steve. What do you think?
Well, I mean, people are still searching for problems, whether or not they're getting clicks from Google. So I think that there's always going to be a need for what we do. People are going to encounter scenarios in their day-to-day where they need to research things. And what we're seeing is, yes, this crocodile graph appear where impressions and clicks are diverging from each other, but that doesn't mean that people aren't in the same scenarios where they have to research and where us as an industry are the best people poised to get in front of that user at that high intent moment. So I don't think that this is necessarily the death. It's just a reframing in terms of what to expect from the client's point of view, and really to focus on that revenue, those demos, etc.
Makes sense. Lily, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Steve. I think that I have 30 plus people on my team that have been doing SEO for a long time. We're now doing, AI search focused SEO, same way that we evolved to do voice search and mobile first optimization and core web vitals and Google Discover and Google News. And it's like the surfaces change in SEO all the time. The way that people search evolves and changes. I definitely think this is one of the most dramatic shifts that we're seeing. But as far as like the tactics, the way to respond, the way to interpret data, the way to execute strategies and implement things, my team hasn't changed very much, right? It's the same people doing the work. We're learning new skills. We're learning new tools and technologies and platforms and everything. But at the end of the day, I certainly don't think SEO is dead. I think SEO is one of the most important ways that you can get visibility in AI search.
Ross, any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all correct. To Lily's point, I think the shift is the most dramatic we've had as an industry since my time, in terms of the techniques and tactics that still impacts traditional search in a lot of ways. But yeah, search is still here. It's just a matter of kind of moving with that shift, and we got to move quickly as an industry, I think, to make the impacts for the companies we help.
Kevin, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I always like to say that AEO, to use an acronym, and SEO are about 90% the same. I'm seeing that there are more things popping up as positive test results that I would not do from a classic SEO perspective, that are getting interesting. But then, to kind of refine that point a little bit, like Google is, I would say, hasn't just caught up to OpenAI, but probably even past OpenAI in terms of model quality. They're getting tons of traction in Gemini. And so I think there's like this interesting, or maybe these 2 to 3 very interesting connected questions in the room, which are, like, how important is ChatGPT actually, or to be visible there? This is not rhetorical, but this is like an actual question that I have now that Google is quote unquote reclaiming the AI war. And what's to be gained from being visible in AI answers? I think that's also a really big question mark. But I don't think that's proven at all yet. And then 3, how important is, or how much can we actually influence these things? I mean, we can influence synthetic prompts, but how much can we actually influence purchase decisions when they happen on AI? So lots of meta questions, lots of philosophical stuff, probably hard to answer. But I think, SEO, AEO, same tactics, different playing field, a few more things that move the needle on AEO, but like, how much of it there is there? And again, I don't mean this in any direction. This is like a genuine question.
Yeah, I've also heard the statistic 90% overlap between SEO and AEO, GEO. whatever you want to call it. I think Lily, you actually said that in your recent like Moz post as well, about a 90% overlap. So my question to all of you is, where is that 10% difference that you're finding between this AI search stuff and traditional SEO? What does that 10% look like? Lily, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this a few times. I mean, the way I'm seeing it, obviously, things are dramatically changing in terms of how people are getting information, how people are interacting with large language models, the prompts, the query fan out, like the kind of fundamental mechanism of how AI search works is a very big difference. And the way that we track that, report on that, the metrics involved, the tools involved, that's evolving. I also think that prioritization of digital marketing efforts is shifting around a bit. One of the reasons why I've been saying since day one is that this is so similar is because I work at an agency where we have a social media team, we have influencer marketing, we have web development, we have analytics, we have a lot of the fundamental skills that are needed to do AEO well, but you kind of have to shift around how you execute it, right? I think like offsite marketing, digital PR is becoming a lot more important now. Making sure your brand is mentioned across important places is much more important now. So I think like it's kind of a reprioritization of what many marketing teams are already doing. But I do think the main change has been in how we analyze the performance and how we measure performance and the metrics involved.
Yeah, I'm seeing that offsite, to Lily's point. I mean, affiliate is like something I don't think many SEOs thought much at all about in the past. And I'm seeing top source URLs where it's often 75% of that corpus of information, and that feels pretty significant. So if people aren't influencing those, that could be pretty negative. And to Lily's point, I mean, digital PR. I'm even like thinking within the idea of digital PR, depends on how you define it, is like performance PR, like getting those listings on. Is it an e-commerce roundup that's listing out your product and it's an AIM? They're getting paid by it for that listing on these major media publishers, but it's informing the models very clearly. And then on the B2B side, you could be on Forbes, you could be on CNET, and those same performance models can be done through PR potentially. It depends on how you work it as a company, but that feels much different in my opinion than where we were.
Yeah, from that off-page perspective as well, there, may be articles that really don't have any significance for your SEO campaign, but you notice, hey, this article on, business.com is being cited for, all of the, a lot of the B2B queries that, a company may have, right? Then that article suddenly becomes something that you're placing new focus on versus if you were just doing an SEO campaign, those sources might not matter to you as much. So just surfacing things like that, where there's these, important pieces of content that are influencing a lot of what the LLMs have to say. I think things like that are coming to the surface more for our clients as well.
Yeah, totally. I think these are, I underline all of these examples. I think they're great. Other things that you might not, you wouldn't probably do for a classical SEO, but more for optimization stuff like markdown pages, right? These are working phenomenally well. Pages just for LLMs with no intention of users ever landing there. JSON that contains keywords or positioning type of stuff, right? Like there's a bunch of ways that you can infuse more content into LLMs with no intention of users landing there, with surprisingly good results. We mentioned the whole kind of offsite Reddit type of stuff. And also, like, sure, you could argue, classical SEO, you also want to engage on Reddit because Reddit shows up so prominently in search. I don't know. But that, and then of course, YouTube stuff, I wouldn't underrate that either. Social networks, LinkedIn. I mean, Lily ran some really cool public experiments showing how quickly you can get cited in LLM just by posting something on LinkedIn that already exists, right? So I think there are a bunch of things that you wouldn't do from a traditional SEO perspective that explains that kind of 10% or maybe more difference to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the affiliate the brand mentions, right? These are very new concepts within large language model optimization because, large language models don't necessarily follow links as closely as the traditional like SEO components like would. So when it comes to the practical like implementation of this 10%, off-page, off-site brand marketing stuff, are there any tangible tactics that anybody would be willing to share in terms of, I spun up a Reddit bot and had it, monitor specific subreddits and comment when, specific topics or keywords were mentioned. Any sort of specific tactics from an off-page perspective that y'all have seen really work?
I mean, Lily's probably going to laugh at this, but listicles, I remember you had a post around listicle exchanges are the new, link exchanges, but I think we're seeing that. And, as well, like just on a more kind of white hat approach to that, one of the things that I've talked about in SEO Notebook is specifically looking at the sponsored posts that your competitors are sponsoring on that are getting that visibility in LLMs and just making sure that you approach those same sites for those, even if it's rel sponsored, you're still going to get that visibility. So that's one that we like to put into practice. And, if another company, your competitor is paying for that link, there's no reason why you can't get on that listicle as well. So that's just a bit more of a white hat way to go about that.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I mean, I think, listen, listicles work, right? They're absolutely working right now. I think a lot of when I have certain like allergic reactions to certain tactics that people are using right now, it's literally because of my history in the space. And it's because of where we left off as an SEO industry right before ChatGPT was launched, right? A lot of companies got hit for jumping on the bandwagon and doing certain tactics that Google later determined they're manipulative. Right now we're in this window where I think Google hasn't cracked down on certain things. OpenAI certainly hasn't shown that they're necessarily going to crack down on certain things, but I see the writing on the wall, right? I saw the writing on the wall before the helpful content update, and then lo and behold, many sites got affected by that. I'm concerned about that happening. So I'm very risk averse. I think many other people are, much more willing to take risks, but I just think that we're in this interesting window right now, and including, pay to play, like sponsored posts, where I think it works. It certainly works right now for AI search. I'd be surprised if a year or two from now you could still see pay to play, content working as well as it currently works in AI organic results, right? And same for listicles.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about kind of paying to be mentioned in listicles, but some that also works surprisingly well. Maybe Steve, you said it. Forgive me if I misattribute this, or don't have the right citation and hallucinate the citation. Is advertorials. You can just sponsor articles on publishers, and they'll be picked up like regular articles. LLMs don't differentiate between sponsored content and organic content. Same with syndication. You can just syndicate out to publishers, and LLMs won't care really. So if you want to quickly solidify something in an LLM, you just pay to syndicate out. So and I do agree with Lily. I would be surprised if that works forever. But for now, you can put the pedal to the metal.
Yeah, I think it all depends on, the reputation of the publication, right? So that's gonna, obviously like do that, cautiously and don't just, insert $80 listicle on some no-name site. But there's plenty of sites that have and also disclose that as well. So I think it's important to kind of balance that with, your common sense.
Yeah, my only soft pushback on that I've been thinking about with affiliate marketing in particular, in competitive industries, the people who can afford to pay there are actually correlated pretty strongly with actually strong companies. Like if you're advertising on best CRM software, you need to be converting at a high clip for those publishers to maintain you in those listings. So even though it's a paid model, I think of it almost like bidding on car insurance as a keyword in PPC. It's all Geico, it's all Progressive, it's all the people you've heard of. And that's because they have really efficient CRO, well-known brand name, high click-through rate. And those same dynamics play out on sophisticated affiliate pages as well, that I think do actually correlate with being warranted to be returned in LLMs. Maybe not in the long tail industries where it could be a little bit more manipulated for sure, but at the kind of short tail, the winners win there, and the winners get listed. So I think it's kind of difficult to be on the up and up, a newer business, and show up there from what I've seen.
Appreciate the thoughts. We talked about some off-page, but let's talk about some on-page. It also intersects with a question that we have from Kate, who asks, what kind of pages would we build out for LLMs only? What would those look like? I'm going to add some more stuff to it. Are there differences in the on-page aspect of AI search optimization, whether it's technical SEO, whether it's content strategy? I think I saw an interesting experiment, if you will, from Pep, like the Conversion XL Winter CEO and founder, where he like created an LLM page that like was like, this is when Winter was founded. This is our, what we do. Like, is there a change in how people should be thinking about on-page optimization, whether it comes from a content or technical perspective?
Yeah, I recently posted something on LinkedIn to this aim. I think it's most applicable in B2B around the idea of product page or ICP mapping. My thought process there for people in B2B, and this is a classical strategy for many more sophisticated, advanced companies, is to have industry pages, company size pages, role pages. So if we're talking CRM software, that could be CRM for healthcare, CRM for enterprise, CRM for operations. Having that full map of who you service well hypothetically could lead to LLMs referencing you when the personalization dial gets turned up or when it's already turned up as it is. And I think also use case pages as well. So the same variants, you cover every use case that people would be searching. And these maybe were classical search. They generally have long tail, and I think they're just good best practice for B2B independent of LLMs. So that's a reason to do it independent of that. But that's one thing we've been thinking about more often as a potentially richly rewarded LLM strategy.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that, Ross. I have a Google sheet that we built at AMSIV that I will share in the chat after leaving this comment about something that I've been sharing in my recent talks that really talks about that. It's basically a sheet that talks about all the different, not only pages, but like information that you should consider adding to your site. I don't know if it's necessarily for AI search, because I think a lot of this stuff is really helpful for consumers as well. It's really just that a lot of companies haven't necessarily thought about providing this content in really clear terms. Sometimes it'll either be missing from the website and they'll be relying on a third party like Better Business Bureau or whatever it is to have that business information, or maybe they've written it in like marketing speak where it doesn't really make sense for an LLM. So I do agree that like making sure that this content is on your site in a way that's legible for not only LLMs, but for consumers as well is extremely important. So it's just a checklist you can follow. But I wouldn't necessarily think of this as like writing it only for machines. I do think that you should consider that humans have a good experience reading it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've started doing some coaching, and one of my students owns a personal injury law firm SEO company, and we were asking about one of the brands that he works with and what kind of practice areas they're involved with, and it got maybe like 40% of them, and his question was, why this is all clearly marked in my navigation, like how come it's not picking that up, right? So now your homepage has to be a little bit more clear in terms of who you serve, your ICP, in that case, what practice areas, do you service? Because the homepage is going to be more easily parsed than the LLM going into the navigation and trying to figure that out themselves. Another area, which is kind of like, back to 10, 15 years ago, is putting more information in your footer as well. Like a lot of that stuff is also getting picked up. So I think Will Reynolds had a, great post about how he put, his client retention numbers, for example, in his footer and, saw that pop up in ChatGPT the next day when you asked about SEER, right? So I think a little bit more homepage clarity and, also talking about, what are those deal breakers for your ICP, putting more of that information on the homepage to help that helps people make buying decisions that then gets reflected in those branded sort of exploration queries on LLM searches. We just have to spell things out a little bit more clearly at this point.
Yeah, totally agree. Clear associations between entities and all that good stuff. These grounding type of pages that were mentioned about Winter, they can have an impact. But again, it always depends a bit on like how much confidence a model already has about a certain topic. So, if you're like, you're not going to all of a sudden become known for running shoes if you're Nike just because you have a single page on your site. Like that's been established for a long time across many sources. But if there is something that, where the model has fewer anchor points or no anchor points, and you want to slowly establish that, you can influence it with LM only pages on your site. You can also, by the way, cloak for LLMs and just include a lot more content in that cloaked version, and they will be accepting that within the context token window that they have. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do on that front. But then the other thing that I think I would also want to add is what you write about, what you create content for. And so I think one of the biggest shifts is that people are searching longer prompts, and therefore they're searching much more specific things. And we've been trained for the last 2 decades to create content for shorter search queries, right? So I think there's a big opportunity now to think about what are all the longer, very specific prompts that people or your target audience, your ICPs are looking for? And do you actually have a specific answer to that in your content? So if you're, I don't know, QuickBooks, right, and you're in accounting and you maybe target construction companies, like do you actually talk specifically about certain questions that people might have who are working at construction companies are looking for an accounting solution, right? It's like the very fine grade detail of information that can often make the decision for customers to buy or not. Like, do you have that on your site or somewhere else on the web?
Amazing discussions. And I think there's a lot of interesting things where it sounds like the entities and the content that you're constructing is meant for obviously users and agents, but trying to color in some more context to help the AI agents understand more about your brand. Before we dive more into the content side, which I'm very interested in talking about, I do have a couple of questions around the technical side. I'm going to blend a couple of audience questions together. Number one, Grace asks, how does everyone feel about llm.txt files, yay or nay? And that's going to combo with what Nicola asks, which is Google has announced it's exploring ways to allow sites to opt out of AI overviews and AI mode. Would you advise this for sites that rely on traffic, or do you think it will come with a cost? So technical stuff, is there anything like llms.txt or blocking Googlebot from allowing AI overviews and AI mode to access your site? What do y'all think?
Look, I think people, no LLM has come out and said that they're using LLMs TXT, so it's not high on our priority list. But then, there's also been arguments as to like how easy it is to do, and it's there as a half an hour activity for a junior person to potentially, or whoever you trust with, obviously, like just don't publish. But some CMSs are allowing that to be more automated. So I think it's all about your priorities and what else do you have to tackle. As obviously, we're SEO, so we're going to say it depends. But as of right now, we don't have any, major large language model coming out and saying that they use that. So at this point, we're not really prioritizing that for our agency. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you have infinite time, sure, do it. But it felt like that was originally an aim of like this broadened LLM universe. And if things are consolidating down to Gemini and ChatGPT for the most part, just don't know if it's really going to get a high amount of use, but may not be hard to put it together. So if you got time, probably doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I think that's our perspective on it as well. If clients really want it, right, we can help build it. But we're certainly not prioritizing that for the dozens of clients that we have as an agency. We have many other fires all the time that we need to focus on for LLMs.txt. So I think, listen, like, it's interesting that Google's come out like 10 times and reiterated how much they're not using it, and then at one point there was like an LLMs.txt on some Google site and it got attention from the SEO industry, and then they like went and deleted it. Just like, okay, that's interesting. But yeah, listen, there's no harm in creating it if you want to create it. I just don't think there's any evidence that it's really being used yet. To your question, Bernard, about like blocking the content. That's literally brand new information as of today, right? It sounds like Google is finally getting some legal pressure, at least from the UK, where they might need to provide ways for site owners to opt out of AI mode and AI overviews. That's a really big decision for companies to make, right? It's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma. I think for most sites, it probably is in your best interest to allow yourself to at least be in AI overviews, because that's still where the bulk of organic search traffic is right now.
What's interesting is that it seems like LLM.text is not, I mean, we know it's not used. I want to be clear on that. I'm bearish, but it's being crawled. So that may inspire you in any way. But that's interesting. Then the other stuff that I call out often for technical SEO considerations is rendering, even though like Google renders mostly fine unless you have severe client-side rendering issues, but ChatGPT can struggle with that more, or usually does struggle with that more. And then there's something to be said also about server response time, right? Don't forget that, again, LLMs are incredibly sensitive to any friction they encounter when retrieving from the web. And so even if you have a severely slow server response time, that makes it harder for LLMs to even fetch your basic HTML. So that is something that I wouldn't obsess over, but certainly take another look at, especially for pages you care about the most.
Right? Yeah, I think it's still TBD in terms of, the importance of doing that. And I think with that, let's dive into content. So I think there's been a lot of interesting studies that have been done surrounding content, right? I think some people are looking at Common Crawl in terms of the authority a website has for, the topics that it talks about and how that is being weighted or influenced within the training data, which we know as the fundamental, pool of data that the AI models are accessing to form an answer. And we also know that there is some sort of a grounding budget where I think, Dan's recent study said about 2,000 words are being used to allocate the model to perform some searches and then make some adjustments to their, knowledge of that particular topic. In this world, I find it interesting to ask at least the starter question. How do you think about affecting training data, right? Training data seems to be the gold standard of what these models are being, trained on. And so is there any specific, at least high level or maybe even low level tactics that you all are thinking about to say, okay, I want to get more of my client site or my own site into the training data, and I'm thinking about it like this?
I would say yes. I think the best way to do it from what I've seen so far is to make sure that your brand and your content is synthesized across as many platforms and channels and, sources as possible. And to take a piece of content that you have and to repurpose it. This is something that like Ross Simmons, for example, has been talking about for years. I saw him talk about this at MozCon in like 2016 or something. To have a piece of content and to make sure that you're repurposing it now, not only in text format, but in multimodal, video, audio, image format as well, so that your brand is kind of recognized across all the different sources that a large language model might be looking. To me, I feel like that's the most effective tactic we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also just becomes about building your brand, and how important that is actually could be considered a defensive tactic as well. Anthropic released a paper, I think 3 months ago or so, where they expressly said that it takes 250 documents to poison an LLM. So if you're not building your brand, you're potentially leaving an open door for somebody else to create, and alter your brand narrative. So I think, as a company, right, you're publishing on LinkedIn, you're posting YouTube videos, you're publishing on social, you're actively promoting yourself to get more reviews on G2, Trustpilot, etc. That all of your branding activity really matters for what the models learn about you, both from content that you create and content that your customers create about you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I totally agree with brand and like some of the things we mentioned earlier, like being mentioned across the web on authoritative sites and all that kind of stuff, right? So you can probably influence it with syndication, PR, right? Like all the good stuff. I think there's two interesting questions about training data. One is how do you measure whether you're included in training data? You could look up the Common Crawl index and see how often you're mentioned, but the challenge is that LLMs have their they're changing the training sources over time, right? So every new model could have a different mix of training data and where it comes from. Early models maybe more UGC and maybe more books, and then later models more Wikipedia, right? So there's a lot of fluctuation that is hard to trace over time. So just because you're part of Common Crawl doesn't mean you're automatically part of the training data. Two, LLMs have been proven to be really bad at attributing any sources in the training data. So the question is, do you even want to be part of training data? And I'm not sure about that, to be completely honest. Again, it's hard for us to detect the causality here of I've been more included in the training data, hence I've been more visible in LLMs, hence I've seen more customers. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get there, but if you're not attributed as the source for a response, then why would you want to be there, right? You could argue about being kind of, the brand entities and like being classified and categorized correctly as a brand for certain things, but who knows if that's not even possible in other ways. So big question mark. I haven't found that I haven't found the connection there to say we want to like we can measure that we've been part of the training data because every model updates mixes the cards.
Kevin stole my point. I think I agree completely on that. Of what I've seen, it almost seems influencing RAG is more impactful generally because we may not be returned on the training data. It seemingly is used for more informational type searches that it's always going to do, but we're like unlikely to get returned. So is it the kind of more commercial queries where they're making retrieval happen that we're more likely to be mentioned and cited, potentially where more of our energy should be spent? Unknown, but yeah, my gut reaction is that is the case.
I'm going to share a resource in the chat here that was actually another adaptation. I follow Will Reynolds about a bunch of stuff, but Will released a sheet that uses the API to retrieve answers for branded questions. We kind of put our own spin on that, made it a little bit easier to use, but originally got the idea from Will. So, that may be a way to measure, how you're in the training data if that API is not necessarily connected to the web trying to corroborate its answers. So, that might be, something that you want to try. And from our testing with it, it generally reflects, what the public thinks about a product, right? So many of maybe my audience at least knows that we work with FreshBooks, right? So FreshBooks, has doubled down on invoicing for 10 years. And when we look at, them in invoicing questions compared to general accounting questions, we're seeing them, be a lot more visible for those queries that, they've pushed so hard over the years, and other sites have talked about them as well. So folks can, try that sheet out and kind of get a sense of, when it comes to the model and, non-web-based API, it's a good way to, get a kind of at least, finger to the wind about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was doing some moderator stuff, so don't mind me. I know we have some questions that deal with this sort of stuff, but I'm gonna pocket some of those for a bit of rapid fire near the end because I do want to talk about this retrieval augmented generation or grounding with search layer, right? We're oftentimes finding that, okay, influencing the training data, it's either rife with mystery because who decides what enters common crawl data or not. And also, we just have no idea how these different models are weighting Common Crawl versus Reddit versus, whatever else that they may be doing. But as SEOs, we do have the practical skills and abilities to influence search results, which we know is being used to influence the retrieval augmented generation of what the AI is giving back to the end user. For that, what are attributes of content that you're finding are being, pulled in more to influence AI responses? And are you doing anything different on those pages, right? I know some people talk about having a clear key takeaways or, too long don't read, obviously putting in a lot of citations or sources or statistics into their article, or, creating markdown files, maybe uploading PDFs to seem more authoritative. How are y'all thinking about the grounding with search layer and how to influence the model to represent or to respond with a client's brand or your brand?
Well, I think one of the things we're seeing in the system prompts that have been leaked is this focus on recency. So making sure that your most important content has been recently updated. We're even seeing in super low competition, kind of long tail, best X software January 2026, working, right? And that's, all subject to change, of course. But I think if we look at some of those leaked system prompts, which you can actually Google, LLM leaked system prompts, find the GitHub and dig into that yourself. We're seeing recency being one of the things that the models are favoring when they're trying to answer a question.
Yeah, totally agree on freshness. Like anything you can do to signal freshness has a absurd effect on visibility. Again, at least with synthetic prompts, not to get down the rabbit hole, but that matters a ton. And then I'm a big fan of FAQs. Again, we've been through that. When was it? Like before Google took away the rich snippets. I think that is back in a certain way, and it works in my experience. Now, a big gotcha that I learned from the Microsoft AEO documentation is you don't want to hide the FAQs in an accordion. It seems that LLMs struggle with accordions and tabs. So you want to have them plain text, folded out, have the wrestling fight with the product marketer or who says it's a bad experience, and then leave them just open text, no accordion, and don't hold back. 8, 10 FAQs or so, in my opinion. The more, the better, because few people make it down there anyway, right? So I might have a bit of an aggressive stance on this, and the whole kind of way of having clear headings and clear writing. I think. Like I'm currently working on another analysis of a large data set that once again shows how much of a difference it makes if you use would, should, could, or if you say are and is and all that kind of definitive stuff, right? So as much as you can back up, which to your point, Bernard, I think like adding as many evidence or sources to your claims and stating them in the text, right? So if you reference a study, say the name of the study, the authors, the year, right? Like don't just link to it, but say it. The more of that you can build in and therefore make more of your writing deterministic, the better it works.
Yeah, I agree with all the points above. I definitely think recency is probably disproportionately, impacting. It's a factor that disproportionately impacts performance above and beyond most other factors right now. It seems like the LLMs are very hungry for that recent data. I mean, it's also, search engines that tend to prioritize a lot of new and recent content for certain topics. It's QDF that's been around the SEO space for a very long time. I've seen with some content that I've written on our company blog like 7 years ago that tends to rank really well. Visiting that page annually and making sure it's still up to date and then kind of updating the date modified is working really well for LLM visibility. I'd be very careful about artificial refreshing. That's a spam policy Google's had for a long time, which is basically that if you're literally artificially refreshing something for the sake of posting a new date, you can get in trouble for SEO. They can detect that pretty easily. So I'd be careful with that. So make sure you're doing real content changes. The other thing I'll add is posting on social media tends to work extremely well in some cases. If you have a pretty robust following on LinkedIn and you post something on LinkedIn, whether it's a post or a LinkedIn Pulse article, that can show up in AI search in like hours, sometimes like minutes, which is really crazy. And same with Reddit and YouTube and other social sites. And then another thing I've noticed that I've been really surprised about is when I post or some of my teammates post on like pretty like high authority sites, including the AMSIV blog. I think, SEO, Google's treating our blog as a high authority site on these topics. When we publish something and we share it on social and it gets some traction, we see it in LLMs within a few hours. So I've been really surprised. I don't always see that happening, but I do see that happening more for kind of like high authority sites in their niche.
I'll share a resource as well. I totally agree with that stuff as well, Lily. I think the weight of your social account also, lends it some credibility, and we're also seeing those pop up in AIOs very quickly, and reference in ChatGPT longer term for the right queries. What Kevin mentioned around declarative sentences, very focused language. I'm seeing a lot of the techniques that we used to optimize with featured snippets also working very well in AIOs. I created a GPT called Snippet Brain. It's totally free to use. A lot of folks are having success with that in optimizing for their AIOs. So I'll share that link in the comments as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, quickly, one of the on the freshness piece, two notes. One reason we love data so much is if you're doing data journalism, digital PR at any kind of cadence, it gives you unique data that can then power of freshness of the rest of the site. So that is a justified reason to update old content because now you're adding value to that content, in addition to building authority, brand awareness, something that's differentiated for your brand in the world of AI. We're calling that like the data flywheel. You can build an asset, reuse it, update things, do it again. Quite powerful. The only other thought, Kevin, on yours, I'd maybe at least say it might be worth A/B testing that. I remember it makes me think back of the FAQ thing, the ungating that, or sorry, the not accordioning it. It reminds me of we used to recommend adding 3++ on landing pages in B2B. And we'd often get that pushback of we're going to detract from conversion rate in doing so. And it was understandable. It's like if it's self-service SaaS, maybe they're willing to convert fast enough such that we may actually detract from changes like that. So maybe on those super long tail product page mapping, and maybe it's still a win, but that was just uh, my fear in that thought at all. I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Well, we're that surprisingly 45 minutes has gone by. I do have one general topic that I know everybody's been asking about that I would want the panelists to all think about, which is tracking, right? We started the conversation earlier this morning or afternoon where, the 10% difference between SEO and this AI search stuff that's going on is around the output, the outcomes, the goals that people are expecting, right? SEO is about traffic, but AI search is now this kind of amorphous state of AI visibility. And you have so many different factors like mentions and citations and branded search impressions that act as indicators of success. But I think where we as an industry still need to figure out is what does success actually look like? I'm going to break this out into two distinct sections. Number one is going to be around prompt tracking itself. And number two is going to be around the actual metrics of, okay, what are the KPIs that teams should be thinking about and focusing on? So number one is prompt tracking. It combos well with a question that we had asked around ChatGPT. It was ChatGPT is starting to do ads. What are the odds that we're going to finally get some clear prompt volume data? But I'm just going to tack on my own follow-up to that to say, how are you all thinking about creating prompts to track for your clients or yourself? And is there some semblance of volume that you're using to inform those prompts? Or are you looking at it or thinking about it differently?
I think using search data as a parable for prompt data is probably the most instructive thing. And I think that kind of ICP mapping concept has value independent of search volume as well, although ideally all of those have search volume um, anyways. But our general recommendation is to like look at your core product pages of all types, at it, what is the best X and kind of have that full inventory of all the products and use cases and ICPs as we talked about, and then tracking against that. And potentially you build on that from a long tail, add that to your corpus to further evaluate in terms of the prompts we choose anyways.
Couple things to say on that. Definitely like search volume, but also just intent volume. So share another resource. I've created a Claude project where I actually share the full prompt for it. And what that does is aggregates the like keywords that you see in Google Search Console and sums all the impressions so that you can see the intent volume for an entire group of keywords. So helpful proxy kind of, translating that to what people might search in an LLM, given the absence of that data from those providers. But another thing that I think we have kind of a unique take on at Notebook Agency is that we're not just tracking like the branded mentions in prompts, but tracking like what the LLMs are actually saying versus what our sales grade answer to questions about the brand are, right? So looking at things like what integrations do you offer, how about your customer support, pricing in B2B, that's always a tricky one, right? But people are asking these questions of the LLM, and what we're doing is actually interrogating those same very bottom funnel buyer questions about the brand and comparing what the LLM says versus if you were to ask a salesperson at that company, what would their answer be? So actually looking at the quality of answers when it comes to questions about a brand versus just looking at mentions for the same types of non-branded queries that people are searching on Google. I'll share the link to the intent volume bot, so if folks want to try that as well.
Go ahead, Kevin.
You go, Lily.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to add, I think that, tying like the idea of like prompt volumes to SEO, keyword research data that we already have, especially directly from Google, I think is right now still the best approach, kind of as like a proxy for how much demand there is for certain topics. Just because I think, right now, obviously a lot of the LLM tracking tools are trying to integrate these ideas around like prompt volumes and everything. But if you read the methodology, I think it still leaves a lot to be desired, and that's not their fault. That's just lack of access to data. So I think like one company that I see that I like the way they're doing it is Peak AI. They have kind of like a meter for how much volume they think a certain prompt has relative to other prompts. It's just like a scale. It's not an exact number. So I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. But generally speaking, I would still look at SEO, keyword research data for those volume numbers. And then another thing to add is like with generating prompts and looking at which prompts to track. I think paid search data is still a really good source of information. If you have conversion data, search query data coming directly from paid, that gives you a really good understanding of how people are actually converting on your site. So tying that back into which prompts should we generate about which topics, I think is really effective.
That's also a good question. I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I think there's something also to be said about qualitative customer data from conversations with the company, either from sales or customer success. But the other thing I wanted to address, Bernard, is kind of, the hope that we all have that OpenAI gives us prompt volume, or that maybe Google shares more long tail queries. And I'm not so hopeful anymore. Especially given their CPM model. I mean, they're being OpenAI, but given the fact that they're going with a CPM model, that makes me less hopeful that they would ever publish prompt volume. And to be fair, I think it makes no sense because most prompts are too long that they're being searched by the same person twice, or sorry, but different people twice. So I think aggregating on the topic or intent level makes a lot more sense. But unless OpenAI pivots their advertising model, I don't think they would, right? They're following much more the like meta advertising model, which is user behavior based on like what you like, rather than Google, which is intent based, which is kind of what you're prompting or searching for. So I have mixed feelings about that one. I do hope that Google eventually gives us a bit more indication, but I very much agree with Lily's point that ads in AI mode, there has to be some reporting on that, and my hope is that we can make use of that to kind of prioritize where we want to be visible and where it matters.
Awesome discussion. We have a lot of questions. I want to get to answering them. And so I'm going to turn the format now into a rapid fire. I'm just going to select one panelist and ask you one question and then try to answer it in, 2 to 3 sentences. So the top most upvoted question, and go upvote the questions to, give us an indication of what you want to see. Gerald asks, what should we be using as SEO or AEO KPIs in 2026? I'm going to hand this one off to you, Lily.
Thanks. That's the hardest question. I guess conversions and revenue, right? But it's really difficult. I think these different LLM tracking tools have different metrics that they're using, which makes it hard to kind of like average out across different tools. But I would say come up with your own measurements for like AI visibility and just kind of define what that means with the client. Maybe you're pulling from a few different data sources. Maybe you're looking at branded impression growth over time, like brand lift. I think it's on agencies and consultants now to kind of come up with their own definition for those metrics and work with clients to kind of convey what they mean.
Perfect. We have now 2 questions that are very similar. Anonymous and Sinead. They ask, are AI visibility measurement tools outside of traditional SEO tools worth pursuing? Would focusing on LLM referral traffic alone be a mistake for the brand? Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to look at like the prompt tracking regarding mentions as highly directional. You can also look at just the amount of times the LLMs are hitting your website, not only clicking, right? So if you're analyzing log files, I think Screaming Frog has a great tutorial on that. But again, to Lily's point, talking with your clients and figuring out a metric that works for them as well. I think ultimately we do want to look at revenue, but is it last touch? Is it first touch? Is it, somewhere in between? I think client communication is more important than ever. And, if your clients aren't sharing their data with you, you're never really going to know what's working.
Perfect. Next question. We have Nicola. She asks, Google Search AI Overviews has confirmed that they're going to do a follow-up question after clicking on the Show More button, but that follow-up question would take you directly into AI mode. What advice would you be giving to publishers in light of this? Kevin, this one's for you.
Yeah, it's so interesting. They're still pushing hard on AI mode, even though they beat ChatGPT. But anyway, different point. To answer your question directly, I think, it's been kind of the same advice for the last couple of years, even before AI, which is to build more of a first-party audience, right? Email subscribers, community, events, all that kind of stuff. I think as a publisher, you don't want to rely on any channel. Even after Facebook crashed for publishers, you don't want to rely on any channel for your survival. And I think, unfortunately, Google traffic has gotten in that same category. So, obviously do your best to optimize for Discover and top news and all these good things. But at the end of the day, you need to kind of make the most out of every click that you still get and funnel people in these environments where you have more control and you're less reliant on a Google algorithm.
Yeah, totally. All right. Alec asks, how are you dealing with LLM attribution in terms of pipeline lead generation? Ross, I'm going to ask you this.
Yeah, recommend having self-attribution for B2B if you have any kind of form submit collection, or if you have to ask, just getting that information of where they originally found you, I think is largely instructive to see where it came from. If you don't have that in kind of your lead forms, lead submits, it definitely is pretty blurry, and referral traffic from ChatGPT is not enough given there's so many unlinked mentions happening. That's muddying the picture. But if you can have that attribution, would get that into your lead flow for sure. Conversion flow.
Conversion flow. All right. I'm still trying to digest some of these, so I'm going to skip to a question that I think this is from an earlier discussion, right? We were talking about how to influence training data, it makes sense to publish once, distribute everywhere. So the question is, how much new emphasis are you or your teams putting on expanding the distribution marketing offerings, right? Posting to social media, PPC, YouTube, so on and so forth. When are we running marketing agencies versus SEO agencies? And what are your thoughts on this? Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like we're selective with the brands we work with if they're not already doing some of that themselves, right? So I think what we're going to see is more emphasis on working cross-functionally with clients, PR, product, help documentation. I mean, it really has to influence the entire website and the entire teams that we work with. If the company is not actively cross-functional like that, I think it's going to be really hard to survive.
Perfect. I have a question here for Lily. Why do you think we are seeing so much spam in Discover? It looks like serious link manipulation. How important do you think link building is in 2026?
I think Google Discover has always struggled with spam much more than traditional search. Also, more spammy content tends to get a lot of engagement in there. So it kind of is self-reinforcing. I don't know how much of that is with link building and how much of it, I mean, there's a lot of manipulative stuff people are doing to get in there, but I think Google recently acknowledged the spam problem in Discover about 3 or 4 months ago, which I thought was interesting. So just because something works now doesn't mean it'll necessarily work forever.
Totally. All right. Let's see here. I'm still trying to understand some of these. Dinesh asks, we've evolved everything from the content, layout, SEO, and a lot more, but not ranking on Google. That's too generic. All right, this one. What is everyone's take on automation in SEO teams and agency teams? So, in light of all of these AI tools that we have you been successfully able to automate parts of your workflow? Ross, what do you got?
Yeah, yes, we have within reason. I'd say it's kind of making the output better. It's not replacing people, really, but we've been able to kind of get more volume out of keyword research than we had previously, which then dovetails into a higher average output in terms of the topics we select by using AI and grounding around brand documents to do that in the best way. And there are elements of the content creation process that are increasingly commoditized. Like I think line editing is just less value additive on average, and the data kind of update piece, I think AI is pretty good at suggesting where that data can go on your content. So we've been using that as kind of a workflow that cuts down our update time. But yeah, still generally warn against pressing a button to generate content. I think that's a race to the bottom.
All right, final question, because we're right up on the hour. Ekta asks, what kind of experimentations are you guys doing on a regular basis on different LLMs to get an idea around what steps to take? Kevin, this one's for you.
Some things I can't talk about. Some more things that I can't talk about. But I mean, this is prime time for testing. I think there's a lot to be uncovered. And so anything from, again, on-page content changes to, design changes, URL changes, snippet changes. I mean, honestly, I think everything is fair game. And so I'm trying to test as much as possible and also take into account like what site we're talking about. Is it a large aggregator site? Is it a smaller site that needs more editorial? There are obviously massive differences. There's something to be said about the geolocale, the language that the site operates in. What I'm trying to get to with my clients is to increase the cycle time of experiments. Like, how can we run as many experiments as possible while keeping them statistically relevant and significant, but there's whole trails, in my opinion, to be followed about any test right now, right? So, for example, let's say you test adding the current year to the URL. Okay, cool. Now maybe you see an uptake in citations and mentions, maybe even from organic search. Cool. Now you want to build on top of that test. Now you want to see, okay. Does it matter which topic this is added to? Is there a difference between topics that have or that deserve freshness or not? Does it matter on large sites or small? You know, there's all these like follow-up tests that you want to do. And so what I'm trying with my clients is we want to test into a direction, staying consistently as much as possible with a high cycle time through the experiments to learn faster than everybody else. Because what I'm seeing is that some competitors are also running their consistent tests. And so it's kind of a race of testing. But I guess the long story short is like you want to think about how do you learn as much as possible in this time that is super uncertain and where things are changing constantly.
Wow, there's just a lot going on, and we're a little bit over, but I do want to ask the panelists one final question. Maybe answer it in 1 to 2 sentences, but what are the tips, the tricks, what would you like to leave our audience with? I'm just gonna go around the board. So, Steve, 1 to 2 sentences on how to just win moving forward.
Yeah, we work with a lot of B2B SaaS, and I think doubling down on your comparison and alternate page strategies, two-way, three-way, ICP niched where you can, where it makes sense. I think the LLMs are actively pushing people towards comparison. I mean, it's a natural strength of LLMs to help you compare different vendors, and we're leaning into that heavily at Notebook Agency.
Lily, what do you got?
Believe it or not, it's the same answer I always have for years, which is EEAT. The reason for that is the more that your brand is considered an expert and authoritative, the more that I've seen both search engines and LLMs tend to quickly pick up your content.
Ross, what do you got?
I would assume that AI mode is going to become the default. Likely Gemini is the default most prominent model, and if it doesn't happen, that maybe is a good scenario. So plan for the worst, and then hopefully the best happens. I think it's the best for everybody.
Kevin, what do you got?
I think the most underrated ingredient in all of this is trust. If you're able to build trust with an audience through whatever means, whether it's classic content, content marketing, PR, YouTube, Reddit, wherever, I think you have like, one of these mushrooms from Super Mario that just make you infinitely bigger and give you a big bonus, whether it's stuff like, new agentic shopping protocols or classic search. Like the one recurring factor that I see in my research all over and over is the difference that trust makes.
There you go. There's just so much to take in. And again, want to do a shout out to our amazing rockstar lineup of panelists. They, took an hour out of their day to share their wisdom, their insights. Go follow them on social media. I had posted all of their links in chat. And with that, best of luck to everybody moving forward. 2026, I think, will continue to be an interesting year with search and AI search. And it's to say that I don't think it's going anywhere. So the faster you're able to jump onto testing new ideas, imbuing your content and your website with trust and authority metrics, the better off you're going to do. Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.